Okay, so welcome to the Educator's Journey. We are here with Wyatt Moum. Thank you, Wyatt, for joining us.
No problem.
Wyatt is a graduate of Southern Oregon University's Educational Studies program, what used to be called our Elementary Ed Licensure program. And Wyatt, you graduated, I think, in 2012, right?
2012. Yep.
Hard to believe. And you were actually one of my student teachers that I supervised in the field. So
I
it's
was.
definitely, yeah, that was a fun year. And so you graduated and then you moved to Northern Alaska to work in a remote, can you pronounce it for me?
Inupiaq.
Inupiaq Village.
Yep.
Wonderful. And you were there for 2 years? Or no, you taught kindergarten for 2 years,
Yep.
then third grade. Then you looped with a class of fourth and fifth grade. So did you have the same students for 3 years in a row?
So I actually, my first 2 years were kindergarten, and then I moved to fourth grade. I taught the same class, the same crew for fourth and fifth grade, um, which was I personally am now a huge advocate of looping. I loved it, especially in some of the communities that we teach or that I teach in. And then I moved back down to third grade and I taught kids that I had taught in kindergarten. So my second year of teaching kindergarten, I taught them again in third grade. And then during that year, I ended up spending about a month and a half teaching eighth grade math too, which was an adventure on its own.
Is that when you did your stint in middle school? Was that eighth
Yep.
grade?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was about a month and a half in eighth grade math. The teacher unexpectedly left during the middle of the year, and so we kind of split up the classes, and I ended up taking on it eighth grade math for a little time, which was hard.
Well, I'm sure you appreciated your math series classes at SOU at
Yes,
that
very much.
moment. Yes, absolutely. Wow. And then, so you were in Northern Alaska for 5 years, is that right? Four
Mhm.
years?
Yep, I spent 5 years up there.
Okay.
And, it was an awesome experience. I got to do a lot of stuff outside of teaching too that I think helped broaden my horizons on what being an educator really is. And yeah, I miss it all the time. I don't know if I could move back there at this point in my life, but I do miss it all the time.
That's awesome. Well, we'll definitely go back to that. But now you are in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and that's where you're from originally, correct?
No, I'm from Oregon. I'm from Corvallis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, born and bred Oregonian, but my wife, who I met up in Alaska, is from here. So we ended up moving to this part of the country, and so here I am.
That's awesome. That's really great. Okay, so can you take us back to what made you decide to actually start teaching? Because I know you had a lot of other interests. Like when you were a student of mine, you were a chef or at
Mhm.
one of the restaurants here in town. So what was it about teaching, or how did you even find your way into the field of teaching?
That's a hard question and a good question. I think one of the things that I knew from an early on that I wanted to do something that allowed me to like connect with people and to be around people and to help people. And, I think I kind of, when I was in high school and then going through my experiences at SOU, I was kind of figuring out what that meant. And, one of the things that I do get easily distracted. And so, when something new and exciting comes up, I like to check it out and experience it and learn about it. And so throughout college, there are several things that kind of came up that I found interesting, but I kind of kept going back. The more experiences I had in an educational setting and in classrooms, I kind of learned that this was truly what I was supposed to be doing, and I've loved every minute of it. It's definitely been the right decision. And kind of what I found is that through being a teacher, it's allowed me to kind of fulfill some of those other passions and connect with some of those other things that I also enjoy through this kind of vein of teaching, which I've been really lucky to find those things. So
That's great. Can you give us some examples of what you really enjoy doing that teaching has allowed you to connect to?
yeah, I mean, coaching. I've one of the things that I've done. One of the reasons why I actually originally headed up to Alaska was I had an opportunity as a 23-year-old male go and get a head coaching position right at the start. And so my 5 years that I spent up there, I coached I was a head coach of the boys basketball team and the girls team for a little while. I ended up coaching wrestling, which I had no experience with, but they needed somebody to coach, so I stepped in. And then since I've moved here, I've kind of kept up with that role of coaching, academics and then sports, and then I've kind of stepped in and been like I was an advisor up in Alaska for some of the classes, and so I've sort of, you know, that term coaching, I think, is, I kind of use it maybe a little loosely, but it's been allowed me to kind of work with ages that I don't exactly enjoy teaching in a classroom setting, but I enjoy teaching outside of a classroom setting. So I've really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about how you even got the job in Alaska? Because from Oregon, especially Southern Oregon, which is a little bit small, it seems like, how would you even go about getting that job in Alaska?
So a lot of people in our cohort that year that we were all together sort of just all jumped on the ship and decided there was this job fair up in Portland, and I kind of wasn't going to go originally, and everybody was talking about doing it and trying to get me to go. And so on a whim, I ended up heading up to this job fair, kind of having not really any expectations of landing a job, but more kind of getting the experience of going through an interview process and getting my name out there, kind of with every intention of just being an instructional or being an EA at a school in Ashland and maybe cooking still. But stumbled upon this quirky little school district in this place that I couldn't pronounce, and had a 2.5 hour conversation with one of the reps from the HR department there, and kind of fell in love with the idea, and sort of this romantic idea of going off to this weird place that I had never heard of and living this unique lifestyle. So it was definitely the best decision I made in college.
Well, that's good. It seems like at that time there were quite a few of our graduates going to Alaska. I feel like maybe they were focused on some of our Southern Oregon or Oregon folks there for a while, because they would even come to our local job fair, and I haven't seen them as much recently, and I wonder why.
Spending time up there, there was a shift in sort of there was a new HR director that kind of came in there, and one of the things that they originally did is they had this coverage philosophy, so they would sort of go all over, looking for people to fill positions, and kind of what they ended up finding was that a lot of the people, there was incredibly high turnover at these schools, because you're getting people who are 21, 22, 23 years old, single, and you're sending them off to these incredibly isolated places where there's not a lot of social interaction, and it's a hard lifestyle to live, especially if you're by yourself. So they ended up sort of kind of changing their philosophy around who they started recruiting and where they started recruiting. So they went to areas that have cooler climates, and they went to areas, and they tried to focus more on like people who are already teaching couples was sort of like the big draw in to get people who already were connected with somebody else and bring them up there, because the thought process is then it's easier for them to acclimate, and then they end up staying longer.
That makes sense. Yeah. That's kind of like that Teach for America model too, where they have people go into these areas and they don't stay as long for multiple reasons, but it's not as sustainable. So that makes sense. Yeah. So how do you prepare to go and work in a village in northern Alaska? Like, what, I know that they give you some cultural training, right? Okay.
Yeah. So before I actually went to the village that I ended up working in, I ended up spending this 2-week experience where I kind of met with a bunch of first-year teachers to the area, and we got to know each other, and we got to spend some time kind of talking with district members, and got that piece of like the nuts and bolts of being a teacher there. And then we spent about a week and a half out in the bush, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, Northwest Alaska, above the Arctic Circle, with several members from a local community and a bunch of kids there, and just, kind of learning a bunch of cultural, practices, and learning tricks, and talking with them, and just spending time with them, which, just the opportunity to casually spend time, talking with these individuals and hanging out with them in a very casual setting, I think was for me the most valuable experience that I was then able to apply to my 5 years living there. Because I think, it's a hard place to live, and if part of the experience was the ability to kind of build yourself into that town and that community, and my experience in that pre contract setting that I took part in really helped me to figure out how to navigate all of that. So it was a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
That's
And then, living there, there's no roads in and out of the village. You have to fly in and out, or if it's in the winter, you can drive snow machines out there, and they have a ice road that they build on the river and the ocean that you can get out there. So you kind of have to bring everything with you. There are stores, but they're pretty limited and they're incredibly expensive. You're kind of at the end of the world. It's a lifestyle that you wouldn't expect is still being lived in this country. It's very unique. It's a lot of fun. It definitely wasn't for everybody. I spent 5 years there, and I saw a lot of people come and go even in just those 5 years. But I loved it, and I do miss it.
Yeah. What were the lessons you learned in teaching there that you took with you in your current teaching job? Like
I
teaching
think
strategies or just lessons in general?
I think the biggest lesson that I have tried to take from that classroom setting, and then I still apply it to a lot of parts of my life outside of it, is the effort and the time that's put into building relationships, and really strong relationships. Because especially with some of our kids that I taught up there, and some of the kids that I teach down here, consistency is not something that they have a lot of in their lives. And then having dependable anybody outside of a school is something that a lot of our students here and then up there as well didn't have. So taking the time to build that relationship and understanding that they're not all going to just buy into everything that you say in the first year that you're with them, even, and being okay with that, and knowing that you've kind of got to take your bumps and bruises along the way as well if you're going to really have them buy into you, was really valuable. And in turn, it allows you to, when things get tough and when you need to kind of come in and provide a little more structure, that you're able to do that because they trust you and they know that you're authentic and that you're in their corner, and that your job is to help them be successful. And I think that I've seen that pay off a lot of dividends for sure in my teaching career. Here now, where I'm teaching now, I don't have the same experiences with my students here. So those relationships that I try to work to build, you have to be a little more strategic, and you have to do them a little bit with a little more urgency. But for me, I always put precedence on those relationships, because I think that they help to allow everything else to fall in line later on down the year.
So that's wonderful. And I remember even when I was going through my teaching program years and years ago, them saying like the first few weeks it's all about relationships and routines and building up your classroom management, and it shouldn't be as much about curriculum. So for new teachers, what are one or two things you do to build those relationships consistently, regardless of who you're working with?
One of the things that I have found has worked for me is that I make myself vulnerable a lot. We have a lot of conversations that, for example, a majority, about half my class is African American, another quarter is Hispanic, and our class is incredibly diverse. So coming off of some of the conversations that we had this last summer around Black Lives Matter, and then especially around the January 6th riots at the Capitol building, we had a lot of really tough and honest conversations. And so, one of the things that I told my classes, in making myself vulnerable, was that I grew up in a way where I did not understand all of these all of these issues in a way that I understand them now. And having conversations and pushing ourselves and making ourselves vulnerable and being willing to allow ourselves to learn and grow and change is what's allowing people like me who maybe didn't grow up in a diverse community to um, press on our thinking and grow and change and feel more empathy and sympathy. So, one thing I always, and I have lots of other examples of just something simple today. I made an error when I was writing something on the board, and I said my bad. Look at, I make mistakes all the time, and we just use those teaching points to allow ourselves to say that we're not perfect as well, and that we're there to make mistakes and learn and grow. And I think that when kids see that you don't try to put yourself on a pedestal, and that you are wrong, and that you make the same mistakes that they make, that I think it allows you to seem more human to them and allow you to connect, in my opinion, in a deeper level with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's great. I mean, it's wonderful that you have such a diverse class. And I'm not that familiar with Wisconsin, but I didn't know it was as diverse as it is for you to have that much diversity in your class.
Yeah, I technically live out in I live in Milwaukee. I work out in one of the suburbs,
Okay.
um, and the suburb that I work in is not very diverse. Um, but the school I work in, this is a dual language school. So,
Oh,
half of our kids are, they're, a lot of them are, Hispanic native speakers. Um, and then half of our school is just incredibly, the other half is incredibly diverse. So we have a lot of people of different beliefs, and they're from different countries, and they're speaking different languages in our building. And we've kind of said that throughout the year, that's our strength, and that's what we use to kind of um, allow ourselves to grow and to push ourselves. So it's really exciting. And the kids, and I teach in the mono side, but the kids in my side have really cool questions to ask kids in the dual side, because even within that dual language side, you have students from Mexico, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Puerto Rico. And so even though they're, one of the things that fascinates my kiddos is that they're all speaking Spanish, but they don't always understand what each other are saying because of the different dialects. And so we've had, cool conversations based off of that. And so, I think the fact that we are all so different within our school is what kind of pushes each other, and it creates an environment for learning, because we're all so different, that we then can build off of to get into those subjects that maybe not all our kids are enthused about, like making inferences based off of this text that we're reading, or multiplying fractions, stuff that they're not as jazzed about, but finding little ways to create that culture of learning that we can build off of.
that's great. Are you able to bring in other resources, or is your school pretty curriculum driven where you have to kind of stick to the curriculum and can't use resources other than what's provided?
No, we're pretty, I mean, we have, there's kind of a general outline for everything that we teach throughout the year, especially in those core subjects of math and literacy. But we're allowed to kind of, within that guideline, we're allowed to get pretty creative and build stuff in there. One of the things that I do is I do a lot of my own writing units. So right now we're kind of finishing up this Mad Lib unit. So we've kind of studied different parts of speech. And so now they wrote a short story. They erased different parts of speech and stuff that you would find in Mad Libs, and they're going to build it out, and then they're going to trade Mad Libs with each other. So we do have some creativity within our kind of like our guidelines.
I love that. I love Mad Libs even to this day.
Oh yeah.
Although I don't always remember what some of the different parts of speech are.
You know what? They have a cheat sheet at the front, and I've definitely used them myself. So
That's awesome though. How fun and engaging for your students to really apply what it is you're teaching in a way that's relevant to them, and that they will retain it more.
yeah, I hope so. We'll see.
That's awesome. Yeah. I wanted to go back a little bit because I know that you've worked in diverse schools like the school you're working in right now, and with staff and students. And so I'm just wondering, how I think sometimes teachers are afraid to have those honest conversations, especially when students bring something to the classroom about what's happening, maybe with the riots, Black Lives Matter, with the trial currently going on. I mean, there's a lot happening around us. COVID, there's just been so much
Mhm,
pressure building, and kids do bring things up and they do want to talk
mhm.
about things. And so, how do you handle that if a student brings something to you in front of the class, or do you just kind of prepare it ahead of time and bring it up yourself?
Um, I think, one of the things that I like to do, because I teach fifth grade, and so they're at a point where they're starting to become more and more aware of the world around them. They're still definitely in their shells of I'm a little kid, but they're branching out a little bit and they're starting
Yeah.
to expand beyond that. So they're aware of all of these conversations that are going around, and my class in particular, they know what's going on, and they can make arguments for both sides of those
Mhm.
trains of thought, which is really excellent. And so I have found with all of the classes that I've taught here, especially, and even up in Alaska, that they are wanting to have those conversations themselves. And so I try to be proactive in kind of keeping them up on some of these current social events and current events in general. If there's, like with all of our conversations around, we were talking about the COVID passports this morning. Like, what do we think? Are these like, why, like, are COVID passports like an appropriate? Are they appropriate? Like, are they fair for everybody?
Mm.
And we so I think I usually will bring the topics forward. And what I found is that they're so eager to have those conversations that they really will go back and forth. And what I find as my role in that is to sort of just be an observer and allow them to kind of talk through it and wrestle to make meaning of these subjects that, even in my opinion, a lot of adults aren't quite grasping at a level that maybe maybe is appropriate. And so and step in when needed. One of the things that we say is that if we're able to talk about this, even if we're not agreeing on everything, and we don't agree in this class, we definitely have just like we have diverse belief in skin colors and ethnicities and religions. We definitely have some diverse political beliefs in this classroom as well. But even at the height of everything that was happening on January 6th, we were still able to have productive, mature, appropriate, respectful conversations. And I think my job is just step in there and make sure that we're keeping it respectful, and that we're making sure that we're speaking in facts, and if we're speaking in opinions, that we're making sure that it's known we're speaking in our opinion.
Wow. It sounds like the dialogue happening in your classroom is more mature than a lot of the dialogue I see on the news or on
I you
different
know
news
what
stations.
I would agree. There was so the after the January 6th riots, we actually came together. Myself and my co-teacher, who teaches fourth grade, we came together, and I started off having the conversation, and unexpectedly, two people from the district office wandered in, and I remember getting red in the face because I was unsure, like, am I pushing the envelope a little bit too much here? Am I going to get myself in trouble? And I got an email later that day saying that they really admired and respected the conversation we had, and they were impressed with what our kids had to say. So, I think
Wow.
what my advice is just, allow kids to have that platform, because you'll be surprised with what they'll say. We're also pretty blessed with a very just diverse community that has so many different beliefs at home that they can push each other, and they learn so much from each other. And
Mm,
I'm not sure. Not every classroom has that, and we're very lucky to have that.
yeah,
That really allows our pushing to be, our thinking to get pushed constantly.
that's wonderful. Yeah. Just so much happening, and it's just kids do want to talk about it. And so creating that space where they know the boundaries around it, they know that
Yeah,
it's a safe place to talk. That's just fantastic.
yeah,
That's
yeah. I
really
think
really needed. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about COVID and how COVID has impacted your teaching. So, do you want to give us a little bit of context around what happened in your school district? I think it was when COVID was just kind of getting started or underway.
Yeah, I mean I remember it was March 13th, so it was Friday the 13th last year. And that morning we received an email from our superintendent saying we have no intentions to close. Next week we'll go forward as normal. Although we have been given, do this, do this, do this. Make sure you guys are doing these sorts of things. And then throughout the day, there was kind of like these sprinkling of emails sort of sent out like, hey, why don't you guys set this up with your kids just in case? And then an hour later we get another email. And then it was 2:50. Our school day is over at 3:30. At 2:50 we got an email from the superintendent saying, hey, we're going virtual next week. Try to get this home with your kids. And so, there was a mad dash because not everybody checks their emails during the day. So there was a mad dash of our principal kind of running into our rooms, telling us this, and she looks like has no idea what's going on. Nobody has any idea what's going on, and so we sent kids home with as much as we could, having no idea what was going to happen, how we were going to approach this. We spent the weekend. I'm part of the technology team here, and so we spent the weekend kind of brainstorming and looking through some ideas, and we came together on Monday and Tuesday of that week with no kids at school and kind of put together some ideas and plans and formats, and then started that following Wednesday. So we had 2 days, well, 4 days if you count the weekend to prepare, and then we kind of hit the ground running because we're a one to every kid has an iPad in our school. We're very lucky in that sense. So it was pretty easy for us, and we had a lot of technology, and they had enough savvy to kind of just hit the ground running. So we were pretty lucky in that sense. And then throughout the summer, we were it was pretty up in the air about what was going to happen. And, 1 week we'd hear there's no way we're going back face to face. The next week there was this hybrid model being thrown out, and then the next week it was we're all face to face, and nobody had any idea. And after a board meeting that didn't finish till 3:30 in the morning, which I remember I was camping, and so I was sitting in my car with my car running with my phone plugged in so I could watch this board meeting to find out what my fate was in the fall. We found out we were going back face to face 5 days a week, and so we started out September 1st. There weren't a lot of schools doing that, but we were teaching a full schedule, and it's definitely has not been easy. It's been pretty exhausting. It's been stressful, but we did it.
So you said as of September 1st, you came back full time. Everybody's in the classroom. Did you have to keep everyone 6 feet apart and masks and
so
ideally?
Ideally, there was a virtual option, and so our school, I think I had at the beginning of the year 11 kids who chose the virtual option. So there are still a decent amount of kids who chose to be virtual, and there was a whole separate school set up for those virtual teachers. So there are teachers who are normally face-to-face classroom teachers who moved into that role of being virtual teachers. But the students who came back, we wore masks, full face-to-face. There were plastic barriers kind of in some parts of the school, not in others. I have 19 kids in my classroom, and my classroom isn't that big. So we're not really, there was no possible way to do 6 feet spaced apart, and they eat, part of the rule there were some flaws in that rule because we have breakfast at school. So they eat breakfast at school in our classrooms in the morning at their desks. Their masks are all off, and they eat lunch in their desks at school now this year with their masks all off. So there's definitely some flaws to the system.
Yeah, it's interesting. My daughters started back just 2 days a week, and first day, one of my daughters, Juliana, who is now 14, by the way.
Wow. Wow.
I know, right? She went back and she was exposed. We got a call from the school nurse saying she can't come back for 14 days. And we thought, how is this going to work? Like the first day back, her whole class was basically quarantined because of exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And now but I think we're in week 3, so she's only been back for a couple of days, and that's just going twice a week. So I can only imagine what a headache that could be.
It's been a
If,
headache. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I know doing it virtually is a headache too. So I mean, there's costs and benefits to both sides, but
Right.
especially when we didn't know what was causing COVID. I mean, we knew, but we weren't getting full information about how it was spread, and people seem to be getting it like thousands by the day. I mean, it just there during that time, especially this winter, was really scary, not
Mhm.
knowing what was happening with it.
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, our whole cohort, so myself, my student teacher, her class, my class, our sped teacher who's housed in our rooms, my student teacher, our assistants. We all got our whole cohort got moved to into quarantine right before Thanksgiving, and then we've had. I think we were doing the count the other day. We've had all but 6 kids between the 36 kids in our 2 classes who have been quarantined at some point during the year, and all the teachers have had separate quarantines as well. My son is in daycare and he's been in quarantine. Like it's hard. It's
It's
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer was. Staying virtual was not easy, like, especially for our demographic of kids. We were at the end of last spring. We were at about 30% attendance. So like,
wow.
is that worth it at one point? So I don't know. It's just been hard. I know that much. That's the only thing I could
Yeah.
bang my hat on.
Yeah. Well, and I see in our group, the Teachers Collaborative, so many of the teachers in there that just went back recently, just exhausted. They're like, this is really, I mean, being a teacher is hard enough, but definitely trying to start a class under these conditions and I guess keep the rules in effect by the CDC, as well as making sure kids are caught up. It just adds a whole nother dimension to teaching that I haven't seen before.
No, no, I agreed. And one of the things that I talked earlier about how I hang my hat on and I take a lot of pride in building those relationships. It's a lot harder when you're distanced and wearing masks all day. Some of the things that I've traditionally been able to do, I've not been able to do this year. I don't have a rug in my room that we can go sit around and have those conversations. Just lots of little things that you kind of just become, that you just are second nature in your teaching, that you have to get creative around this year. So yeah, it's hard. It's really hard.
Absolutely. So, one of the questions I always ask is what lesson or message would you like our audience to walk away with from our chat today? Do you remember what you wrote?
I don't remember what I wrote. This is a while ago. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You were talking about not judging others in the profession.
Oh,
And
sure. I think one of the one of the things that I notice within the district I work in now, and even just hearing other school districts talking about other school districts, is there's a bit of a superiority that some people have about a certain community that they work in, or a certain school that they work in, even within that community. And taking when you observe a certain group of kids, that you are maybe judging them based off of how they're conducting themselves in a classroom, or how they're conducting themselves in the hall, or whatever it may be. Or even our school, because of we're a turnaround school, we're a PBIS school, we have a lot of rules and structures and procedures, because our kids don't have that anywhere else in their lives other than in the school. And so even that, we get people are like, look at how they're making them walk in the hallway, look at all these directions that they're giving them. We've heard these comments, and we've heard these comments being made about our kids because of the way they dress, or the way that they look, or you know it's sometimes it's hard to hear, because I think one thing that teachers should have is support for each other. And camaraderie around the fact that we're all trying to work for the same thing. We're all trying to work to have our students be successful members of society, and whatever that means for them. For some students, it's going to go be a college professor of education. For some students, it might be, going and working in the trade somewhere. And so, enabling them with the steps to be successful is all our goal. And so, being sure to support each other no matter where you are, and holding each other back, and being willing to learn from people who are in different circumstances, and dealing with different demographics, and dealing with different struggles in their classroom. I think I didn't grow up in an environment where I now currently teach. I didn't attend a school like where I now currently work. And I have I think I would have been shocked by some of the stuff that I see growing up in this school, but it's different. These kids are raised differently. They have different backgrounds. They have different traumas in their lives. And so, understanding that and supporting that, and finding ways to still celebrate the successes that we have here, I think is key in helping us to move forward as educators. And then, if we're getting bigger picture as a whole country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and what you said about supporting one another and valuing the work of teaching, regardless of the school you're teaching at, the demographics, the needs of the students, you're still teaching, and you're still trying to affect change in a positive way in the lives of your students. And that's what it comes down to. And I think that, yeah, I hope that you sharing that message will help some people maybe look at their situations and think, oh, I'm not alone in that, and feel supported.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
Absolutely.
be willing to try out different career. The best mistake I made was I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I ended up going up to Alaska. I really didn't know what I was getting myself into when I came here. But being thrown into situations that are so different than how I grew up and how I was raised has really helped push me as a person. And it's kind of molded me into my beliefs and my values and who I am today. And so, if you're a young educator or looking for your first job, I think there is so much value in pushing yourself to try out something that's very different than your norm, because it's not for everybody. I know that, but I think there is a lot of value in pushing your comfort level.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing I remember about you too, with student teaching. I remember one day I showed up to observe you, and you were just starting out using the Tribes book, and you had planned a lesson with it, and you were really excited about it, but you're like, I have no idea how this is going to work, but I'm just going to try it and see if it works. And that was so awesome. Like, a lot of student teachers won't do that because they're feeling, you have your supervisor watching you, your CT watching you, plus you're doing something totally different that the kids have never done before. But you're like, yeah, I'm just going to give it a go and see what happens. Is that okay? It's like, okay, sure. I don't even think you asked if it was okay. You're just like, I'm just going to do
Probably
this.
not.
But it worked out. Actually, it didn't work out that well, but you redid it the next day, and it worked out really well. So you took what you learned from it, and you tweaked it, and then did it again the next day, and it actually was better, I think. Or you redid the lesson at some point. But
cool.
That was pretty
cool. I
cool.
use Tribes all the time, so that's great.
Yeah, it's a good book.
I don't remember this lesson, but I believe it 100%.
So my last question for you is, why do you continue to stay in a profession that is underfunded, unappreciated, and underappreciated, and consistently misunderstood?
Yeah, I think when I look at my privileges as a white man in this world, I am just heaped with, so many privileges and so much luck and so much that is just given by society. And I look at a lot of my students as an educator, and I see the obstacles that are in front of them. I think one of my first big lessons as an educator around this subject of inequalities was when I was in Alaska still, and I was I was coaching, and we were down in Anchorage for a tournament or something, and we were walking around at Fred Meyer, and it was myself and like 8 Inupiaq boys who were in high school. And it was the first time in my life that I was followed by store clerks. And I didn't realize what was happening at first, but like I remember turning around and like this clerk was just following us, and it became really obvious quickly what was happening and what he was doing. And that was like my first like wake up to like, wow, this is different. It was weird. And so, and I've had experiences like that since then, even here, like just, this has happened 2 weeks ago. There's a lady in the neighborhood that we are in our neighborhood around our school who was upset about some of our African-American students walking together in a big group home, and complained to the school about it. They weren't doing anything. Some of the kids are my class. One of them is they're all the greatest kids in the world, but the optics of it looked awkward to her. And so, for me, I think, taking from somebody who comes from so much privilege in society because of not only how I was raised, but now how I look, I want to use that privilege to, help out and use it in a way that I can help guide students who don't and have a lot more obstacles than I had, and to work with them to, continue to be true to themselves and celebrate who they are and find the strength in their identity. But, at the same time, if we're being honest, know how to navigate our world, because it's, that's a sad reality, but we've had these conversations in our class, but it is the reality of the way that our world works right now. And so understanding how you can be successful within that context, I do, that's something that we work through. And so, this job sometimes is maddening. I have days where I don't always go home and like my job. There's times where I drive here and I'm not always as enthusiastic as others. But as soon as I'm around the kids, and as soon as we have those moments, it's all worth it. And all the parts that sometimes are hard or make you want to just pull your hair out at the end of the day. I don't have a lot of hair, but they all become worth it because of the kids. And like I said, just my drive to help those who don't come from as much privilege as me, I think is the easy way to sum that up.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know we went over the half-hour mark, but it's just such a joy to see you again after 9 years. It's been almost 9 years, I think, right? And to see your lovely family growing. I know you have a son and your wife is expecting again. Is that correct?
She is. She's there. We've got 2 boys on the way.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So a lot of your peers from your cohort couldn't be here because they're teaching right now, but I know they're looking forward to watching the live back. So
hey, everybody.
So thank you so much for taking the time, and it's just so wonderful to see you again. And I will let you go because I know it's getting late where you are. But
thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And we will see you, I guess, in the group.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks,
Wyatt. Bye.